Let's talk first of all about this imminent arrest that feels like it's been imminent for, I don't know, the last year? No, 8 months.
This is the third arrest he's had for various crimes that he is being targeted for. This one is kind of interesting. This is to do with his behavior leading up to January 6th in terms of instigating the crowd, and that there would not be a uproar, a riot at the Capitol for, if not Trump, for starting it and telling people, whipping people up and saying the vote had been stolen. And they're likely to charge him based on a few different statutes. One of them is a civil rights statute that dates back to the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. There's another about conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding, which was that proceeding, of course, was the Capitol's trying to count those electoral votes.
And I mean, this might sound naive, but we are far away on the other side of the Atlantic. Is there any chance that he might actually be convicted of any of this? And does any of it have any impact on his presidential ambitions?
I think there's actually a pretty strong case that he is likely to get convicted, especially on this case, because it has a Washington D.C. jury, and Washington is a very liberal place. 90% of residents here voted for Biden in 2020 against Trump, and so the jury pool is much more favorable to the prosecutors than they would be in Florida, where he is charged with in that documents probe. And so I think that the Jack Smith, the special counsel and prosecutor, he is pretty happy that they can, do that. They can use this DC pool because that's a way for them to ensure that he at least gets convicted on some of the charges, even if he wins in Florida on the documents, which is still unlikely because the evidence in that case is pretty damning.
Meanwhile, he doesn't seem to be that bothered because he's mounting film screenings at his home, I think in Mar-a-Lago this was. The Sound of Freedom, not necessarily critically acclaimed, but already outdoing Indiana Jones at the box office. Tell me a little bit about this film, which has been adopted, it seems, by the QAnon movement.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild nexus between Hollywood and politics and Trump. And so it's about this DHS agent, Department of Homeland Security agent, who goes down to Latin America to rescue kids being held in child sex rings. And so that is kind of some of the narrative of QAnon, which is that baseless conspiracy theory that millions of Americans believe. And Trump has adopted it because he wants those followers from QAnon to vote for him and to support him and donate to him. And so there is Trump has had a screening of the film at Mar-a-Lago. Different senators who are favorable to Trump, like Ted Cruz, have talked about how great the film is. And that screening in Mar-a-Lago drew the star of the film, Jim Caviezel, who was in Passion of the Christ.
The Mel Gibson film.
The Mel Gibson film that was criticized as anti-Semitic. And so it's all of these conspiracy theories, even though this is not to say child sex trafficking is not a serious problem. There are thousands of children around the world who are being held for terrible purposes. But when it becomes this, linked to QAnon of Hillary Clinton and her campaign aides sucking the blood of kids, then it goes off the deep end.
And just finally, Daniel, what does it tell us, though, quite seriously, if people are flocking to see this film in the numbers that they are, and it's beating something like Indiana Jones, which you think would be a sort of multi-generational popular blockbuster. It may not be the best Indiana Jones ever, but nevertheless, it's indie. What does it tell us about Trump's popularity and indeed the possibility of him being the next president of the United States of America?
Well, I don't think it's going to affect whether he's going to be president. But I think it says something about how Americans have lost trust in institutions. You've seen a lot of different issues related to that, since the government can't even crack down enough on sex trafficking of underage kids, But that also extends to how 100,000 plus Americans die from the opioid epidemic that the government has not been able to stop. You had 1 million people die in the coronavirus pandemic of Americans because Americans had politicized science. They were not wearing masks and all of that. And you had the mortgage crisis back in 2008, where millions of Americans got thrown out of their houses. You had the Iraq war launched on false pretenses. And so people are latching onto something and say, hey, I really want to watch a film where you have a heroic federal agent going down on personal time, not being paid by the government in some ways to rescue kids. And even though
God, it
the various
takes me
governments
takes me back to Steven Seagal days.